Oh God, open us up. Open our eyes that we might see and our ears that we might hear. Open our hearts that we might feel. And then, oh God, open our hands that we might serve. Amen. So my eldest daughter lives in California, and she and her family, they have 3 kids. She and her husband, Phil, have 3 kids, and they are vegetarians. And so one day, they're driving to a Little League game, and the middle son of their 3, my grandson's name is Shepherd. Shepherd at that time was 8. He's 9 now. And we're driving along, and they stop to get breakfast burritos, a common practice for them on the way to the Little League game. And so they're driving, and my daughter passes them out to everybody in the car so they can eat their breakfast burrito on the way. And as they're driving along, she hears from the back seat behind her my grandson Shep say, And then a couple of minutes later, he says, Mom, I think there's bacon on this one. And she said, what? There's bacon on this one. And so she says, let me see it. And so he gives her the deal, and she says, yes, there's bacon on it. And she starts taking it off of there. And he says, wait, Mom, bacon's really good. And she says, yes, but we don't eat bacon. And he's like, So a few minutes later, he's eating the back seat, and he says, Can you be a vegetarian that does eat bacon? Is that possible? You can be a vegetarian that does eat bacon. I think that's, the question at some point in Shep's life, he's going to have to decide, what does he think? Can he say, you know what, I'm not going to be a vegetarian. I'm going to be a vegetarian that eats bacon. That's what I'm going to be. Who knows? What happens is we're born into families, and those families, either intentionally or unintentionally, shape us, shape our beliefs and our values. And those families, and for a certain part of our life, we say, well, this is what my family believes. This is what I believe. And we kind of go on along our business. And then at some point, we begin to experience people who believe some other things. And they talk to us about other things, and we're like, I wonder why they believe that. That's not what we believe. And you begin to think, sort of ask questions about what you believe a little bit. And then as you get older than that, then you begin to encounter some really diverse people who believe significantly different things than you do. And you may find them to be awesome people. And you're like, wow, how can they believe that? I don't get that. And you begin to wrestle with that, like, why do they believe what they believe and I believe what I believe? And all of that begins to just bubble around inside you. And at some point you have to ask the question, like, what do I believe? There's this wonderful passage in Acts 16. It's the one we use when young people are confirmed here in their 8th grade. The passage, Jesus has taken his disciples, and they're in Caesarea Philippi, which is way up in the north of Israel. And he's right before he turns around, they've been with Jesus for 3 years, and right before he turns around and, as the scripture says, sets his face like a flint to Jerusalem, he asks his disciples, who do you say that I am? And they say, well, no, let me do it right. He asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they say, well, some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And he says, but who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter says, you are the Christ, the only Son of the living God. At some point, we have to answer that question ourselves. Who do I say that Jesus is? Right? Sometimes it's a crisis of faith that leads us to that place where everything that we've believed just doesn't seem to hold up anymore. We've had maybe a tragedy in our life that leads us to ask the question, do I really believe this? Or maybe it is you grow up in a family that is, I've been reading about people who grow up in these very narrow, fear-based Christianity families with, it's very, very toxic. And at some point they realize that this feels unhealthy and I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And so I have to go figure out, am I just going to throw out the Christian faith altogether? Or am I going to figure out what I think is right? Or let me do the flip side. Maybe someone grows up in a very moderate Christian family and they look around and they at some point they say, the Christians that I know aren't any different than anybody else in the world. They have the same secular values that anybody else does. And they're no different than anybody. Why would I want to do that? And so they say, I want something that has substance, that calls on people to make a radical change, not just go about their business and go to church on Sundays. And so they say, I got to look harder. Or maybe at just some point the emptiness inside you that's looking for the spiritual truth, whatever it is of just going through the motions, doesn't fill you anymore. And you have to ask, gosh, what do I really believe that I might be willing to build a life on? I think that happens with all of us at some point. This passage of today is a really remarkable one, and it is often, I wish we ought to study it more often. Here's the deal. Simon Peter is a devout Jew. Do not ever forget that. Simon Peter and all of the disciples are devout Jewish, they're devout followers of the Jewish faith. And Simon Peter grows up in a Jewish family. He learns the Jewish law. He says the Shema every day. He follows the Jewish principles about what to eat and how to live. And he's Jewish. And then he meets this rabbi, this amazing Jewish rabbi named Jesus. And Jesus is a devout follower of the Jewish faith. And he says to the disciples, you got to live deeper than just the ceremonial law. You've got to really dig deep. And he says, I want more. And so he gives himself fully to believing that Jesus is in fact the Jewish Messiah, come to save the Jewish people. That he is the answer to all of the prophecies that have been there, that he's come for them, and that he's going to lead them to that place where Judaism once again is a blessing to all people. And he believes in that, but he is still a devout Jewish follower. And even after the resurrection, until somewhere around 60 A.D., Christians, to be a Christian meant you were a part of a particular sect of Judaism. And then we have this experience in Acts 10, where Peter, he has gone to Joppa. Joppa is what is now Tel Aviv. It's just on the edge of Tel Aviv. They're right next to each other now. And he goes to the house of a man named Simon the Tanner. You can go today, and there's a house there that they say is the house of Simon the Tanner. They don't know that for sure, but that's the tradition. And he goes up on the roof, and he's hungry, and he has a vision. And that vision is of this sheet coming down from heaven, and says it is full of animals of all different kinds, reptiles and fish and birds of the air, everything. All these animals are there, and it says, kill and eat. And he says, wait. I can't kill and eat. We don't eat reptiles. That would be wrong. I've never done that before. And so here's the Jewish law. The Jewish law was you couldn't eat reptiles, you couldn't eat shellfish. And here's the one sometimes we misunderstand. You weren't allowed to eat animals that had cloven hooves, but did not chew the cud. So animals that had cloven hoofs but chewed their cud, you could eat. But if they didn't chew their cud or didn't have a cloven hoof, if they didn't chew the cud, you couldn't eat it if they had a cloven hoof. It's very complicated. So this is a big deal, right? This is a big deal. This is what established, how you knew whether you were following the law. And the voice says, kill and eat, and he says, no, I've never done that. And the voice says, don't call anything unclean or profane that I've called clean. Wait, what? I'm going to have to reevaluate. Well, look, this is really, it seems like not a big deal, but it's really a foretaste of something that's a much bigger deal. Because as soon as that happens, as soon as he has this vision, there's a knock on the door downstairs. And there is a messenger there from Caesarea by the sea, different Caesarea, from a Roman centurion named Cornelius. And Cornelius is a Gentile. He is a non-Jew. And he says, I want you to come and tell me about Jesus. And Peter's thinking to himself, wait a minute, I'm not allowed to be with Gentiles. I'm supposed to stay pure. I'm supposed to stay clean. But he goes anyway. And when he gets there, here's what he says. This is from Acts 10. While talking with him, Peter went inside and found a large gathering of people. And he said to them, you are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. But God has shown me that I shall not call anyone impure or unclean. This is a radical change. And it is this moment is a beginning that finally leads to St. Paul and others saying, you know what, you don't have to. So up until this time, you could become a Christian if you were a Gentile, but before you did, you had to convert to Judaism. You had to convert, and if you were male, you had to be circumcised, and you had to follow the dietary laws and all of the laws of Israel. But at this moment, he's saying, wait a minute, we're going to bring everybody in, and you don't have to convert. Everyone is welcome. This is a big change. How did Peter come to that realization that, that the things that he'd been taught, he had to reevaluate? And all of us have to get to that moment at some point and say, wait a minute, what do I believe? What is right and true? Not just what I was taught, but what is right and true and real. Well, I want to give you very quickly, I want to just invite you to go on that journey for yourself, to come to that place where you can answer, not because somebody told you the answer, but because you can answer for yourself, who do you say that I am? Here are three, what I refer to as anchor points, 3 things you can hold on to. The first one is the Bible. Look, we read the Bible, and I'll tell you, I read the Bible, and there's things I say, I don't really understand that. I don't know what to do about it. There are things in it that I think, really? I'm not sure. We're going to talk about it later in the series. Do donkeys talk? There's a story in there about donkeys talking. I'm not sure donkeys talk. I have to wrestle with that one in my mind. There are parts of it that offend me. God calling Joshua to go into the land of Canaan and kill every man, woman, and child. How do I deal with that? So I look at these parts of the Bible I don't know what to do with, and there's a temptation to say, I'm just going to forget about it. Forget the Bible. No. Look, this is where we understand what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus. And there may be parts of it that you have difficulty with. There may be parts of it that you don't understand. There may be parts of it that even offend you. But at some point, you can't figure out what does it mean to be, who did Jesus teach us to be without that story. So read it, hold fast to making it a part of your inner Bible. Even if there are parts of it you have to say, I'm going to set that aside for a minute. I just don't get that. So that's the first thing. That's an anchor point. Here's the second one. The second anchor point is family. I have this picture that I keep in my office. And it is, these are the Methodist preachers that are in my background. That's my grandfather, Lawrence Landrum, and my uncle, also Lawrence Landrum. Go figure. And my great-grandfather, Dr. Ingram, and my great-grandfather, Dr. Kiker, and Boyd Wagner, my father-in-law. And they sit in my office and look at me and say, don't mess this up, Pace. Don't mess this up. And it's interesting. Now, I look at these folks, and then at the same time, I have my father, who was a college professor. And when he was in high school, he traveled all over with what they called caravans. Some of you are old enough to remember caravans. And they preached the word and had these camp meetings and that sort of thing. But when he got to college and graduate school, he began to question his faith and ultimately said, I don't believe that stuff. And it was really only as he was in his last days that he really turned back to the church. He never really turned back to the faith, but he talked about how the church had been so important to him. And it was really interesting. But I look at my life and I say, I'm tied to all of that. I can't just go, I'm going to start over from fresh. I'm going to start from whole cloth and forget about everything that anybody's poured into me. No, right? That's made up with who I am. And as I wrestle with the questions, I got to look at that tradition that's come there. There is this passage in 2 Timothy where Paul is writing to Timothy, and he says these words. Timothy was his protege. I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you. And then a few verses later he says, guard the good treasure that has been entrusted to you. Right? Don't mess this up. So I hold fast to that. And as I begin to wrestle with questions and things I don't understand, and I recognize I'm just not starting from scratch. Here's the third anchor point, and that is your community. As I've been doing the research for this series of sermons on questions that often people go, I don't understand that, there's this whole conversation about what is often called deconstruction and reconstruction. And I've been reading people about that as they deconstruct their faith and put it back together again. And there was a podcast of this young woman who had been through, had grown up in a fairly fundamentalist church and was struggling with some of the things that they taught. And the podcaster asked her, so how are you dealing with that? And she said, well, I still go to church every week. And he said, well, why, if you're not sure you believe exactly what they believe? And she said, those are my people. And they have loved me, and they've cared for me, and I'm a part of them. I'm not rejecting them. I'm a part of them. And they have been the one thing that has influenced me more than anything. So we hold fast to that community. It's not saying that you can't move to a different church or something like, it's just that you have to recognize that God's been active in shaping you and forming you up till now. So those are three anchor points, but I want to give you then three, what I'm calling launch pads. Things that help you to say, now here's what, as I begin to sort of try and put this together again, what am I going to look at to sort of understand? And the first one, it sounds like a Sunday school answer, but it's Jesus. Take many of those pieces of theology that you don't understand, and sort of set them aside and study Jesus. Who is this guy? What did he teach? I fell in love with the faith because of who Jesus is. I mean, this man who says, look, life is about giving of yourself in service, out of love for others, about connecting with and standing with the people who have been marginalized, who are on the outside, who is willing to run against the grain of the culture around him and stand up to the challenges that brings. And just to read those things and go, wow, that is, man, I love that. And to start with Jesus the Christian faith is not so much about religion, it's about Jesus Christ. And so continue to focus first on Jesus and make that the core. The second thing I call, second launch pad, I call decluttering. Any of you Marie Kondo people? Marie Kondo was this woman who decided that you needed to declutter your life, your closet and your house, and you were to go around your house and pick up things and go, does this bring me joy? And if not, you throw them out. I don't think that's not what I'm saying we're about. The Christian faith is not all about bringing us joy. Sometimes people do that. No, what I think we do, though, is say, what is essential? And what is beyond essential? What is the second layer as opposed to the essential element? We had one of our staff used to say, you need to know the thing that makes the thing the thing. And he said, you don't ever want the thing without the thing that makes the thing the thing. Like you don't ever want decaffeinated coffee. That's the thing without the thing that makes the thing the thing. And you don't ever want alcohol-free beer, right? That's the thing without the thing that makes the thing the thing. So here it is. What is it that's essential that makes Christianity Christianity for you? Here's what I mean by that. Maybe for you it is the notion of being forgiven. That's what it was for John Wesley. He realized at one moment that his sins, even his, were forgiven. And God's grace was amazing. Or maybe for you it is, this was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer believed that as he reached the end of his life, that the essence of the Christian faith was prayer and righteous action on behalf of those who are suffering. So maybe for you, that's the essence of the Christian faith. And you say, that's what I'm going to stand on. That's what matters most to me. Or maybe it's the idea that after I die, that there is life beyond. And that I really believe that love always triumphs. And that good will triumph over evil. And that life triumphs over death. And that's the essence. And the rest of it, I can build on that. But that's the one thing I can just hang on to. I don't know. Whatever, as you begin to look inside you and the thing that resonates most with you and says, that's what I believe, yes, that's what you start with. And the rest of the pieces, you can build on that and change and move around. But that's the thing that allows you to say, you are the Christ. Yes, I believe. And here's the last thing. The last thing is trust. Sometimes, on Easter, we talked about the message from Jesus that says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to start off on this journey. Sometimes we're afraid, I'm going to make the wrong decisions. I'm convinced that when I get to heaven and see Christ face to face, he's going to say, Pace, come on. You missed on this and this and this and this and this. Of course. But I don't need to be afraid because God's love is way bigger than that. Here's what C.S. Lewis writes in Mere Christianity. The great thing to remember is that though our feelings come and go, God's great love for us does not. It is not wearied by our sins or our indifference, and therefore is quite relentless in its determination that we shall be cured of those sins at whatever cost to us and at whatever cost to him. God's not going to give up on us. He's going to keep working on us and keep loving us. So we don't need to be afraid. I have this Bible. I just get it out. I don't know. I've shared it with you before. It was my grandfather's. And in the front it says, Crockett, Texas, August 27th, 1941. He had been a pastor for probably about 10 years at that time. This day I have entered into a new and more intimate relationship with Jesus. I think things will be different from here on out. D.L. Landrum. I often think of what led him to that place where he had to look again at his faith and say, this is who I see Jesus as. You are the Christ, the only Son of the living God. And I want to be in relationship with you. He made that journey, and we can too. Gracious God, give us the strength and courage to hold fast to what is real and true, and to have the wisdom and courage to step out and come to terms with just what do I believe, and to respond to your question, who do you say that I am, with the words, you are the Christ, the only Son of the living God. Amen.